I want to hear you loud. I want to hear that beautiful voice of yours. Your beautiful New Zealand accent.
Oh, yeah.
Wait, too loud.
He asked if he could turn me up just so he could say too loud. It was all just so he could.
No, it wasn't.
It was laddering up to that one moment.
I'm literally, this ear, right, this one, I don't know what side it's on for you, is still clogged with fluid from shooting a video that I just did last weekend. I told you I was going to do.
Which song was it?
I shot a video for Don't Chase the Dead with Norman Reedus from Walking Dead.
That is my second favorite song on the album.
Oh, thank you.
Right now.
What's your first?
Right now. Broken Needle.
I appreciate that.
What is the last sentence on the album?
Now you're quizzing me. I'll never, ever play you again. So it's a bit of a play on words in that comparing a relationship to an LP, in a sense, and putting it away after it's scratched up and not wanting to hear that memory again. So I just started thinking about, or at least a year and a half before the pandemic happened, that it was about evaluating my own mental health and what I wanted to say, not knowing what would come, but the idea of sometimes there's things that have happened in the past. You have to forget about who you were, think about who you want to be. Not to sound like a motivational speaker, but just thinking about the past, were there sad points, were there strong points? What did you feel? No one's ever had an idyllic upbringing. If you had, you probably would. We wouldn't have this conversation right now. Yeah. We'd be boring. I mean, because it's almost the sense of all of the kids in school, at least from my opinion, the ones that got picked on had to try harder to be creative. So the ones that had everything handed to them didn't try harder. And they end up being the bullies. And we're in a bully culture where it's like names and blames. And we just need to move past all that at this point. But a lot of that was going through my head. I wrote that song. And on the LP itself, sorry if this is a spoiler alert, a lot of people have received the LP already. It just stays. It gets stuck on that last song until you take the needle off. So it continuously plays in perpetuity until you remove it.
So that leads me to my next question, which is how does Shooter Jennings, who is the only son of Waylon Jennings, an original modern country music outlaw, and the Antichrist superstar who for the longest time seems to have reveled in the chaos upon which you talk on this album, make an album that is easily the deepest, most personal, reflective album you've ever made in your entire career, and one that seems to me is searching for a pathway through to inspire rather than to light the flame to set the chaos into motion. That's what I get from it.
Thank you. Sometimes you need the fire to burn things down, metaphorically, to build them back up. So there's that element. But I don't think that we really were considering that so much, is that we wanted to make something that was, while we were listening to Diamond Dogs and other records that were, and Shooter was inspired by Antichrist Superstar, and I did not know that. And I was inspired by Black Ribbons, his album, not knowing each other still. When we got together, it just sort of amounted into this. It can't be only the lyrics. It has to do a lot with the melodies in which he evokes and sometimes conjured me to come up with lines or melodies. And then sometimes, they would feed off one another. But we didn't expect it to be quite of the moment that it is right now. But I think I wanted to make a record that was always of the moment, where it's,
yeah.
Can you ever think of an idyllic time that's ever really happened in life? There's never really been a true, perfect era for anyone. So this is a bad time for everyone, but it's not any worse than what I grew up hearing my father talk about with the Vietnam War. And that's just my own personal experience. Everyone has had their own rough and their own way of interpreting the world, where none of it's going to ever be perfect. But I think if one way you could look at it, if all artists decide to stop making art, the entire world will fall apart.
It remains one of the only pure filters right now, especially, and I've spoken to this end with a few people about the voice of the artist and the fact that if you choose to put a record out right now, and even back in the day, there may have been an influencing factor from a label saying this is too much, we can't. There are people who are paying out what wages who don't want this. You've been on the receiving end of those conversations. I know you have, but you can do it yourself now. You're in a position whereby you can find the purest filter in order to express yourself, and more than ever before, we need that.
Well, not just musical artists. When you think about it, architects, painters, clothing designers. What you do, everybody who does something that adds to the world is the opposite of most politics and religion, which was my initial, I guess, hard on or anger against the world, because I was unsatisfied with seeing politicians who are older people and that's not about because they're older, it's just people that are not of the culture they're representing.
There's an institutionalization that comes from that thinking over time. And I suppose two questions spring to mind. I'll start with the first one. Do you feel proven right then if you arrived with something to say based on those two touch points, politics and religion, that's who I'm up against right now, and then take a look at where we are in society and what is occupying a lot of the debate and causing a lot of the disruption, do you feel to some degree like you're on the right path and you've been proven correct?
Well, I feel that sticking to art is being on the right path, because all we have right now, we have art, music, movies, and books and paintings and whatever it is that inspires you. But without that, all we have is just propaganda and bullshit. And it doesn't really matter who's right or who's wrong. It's not even worth having a conversation about. But the conversation should be about everyone should figure out who they want to be, not who they were. And forget about your childhood scars, mentally, physically, whatever they are, and rise above, because now is the time for people to come together, and not in a hippie way as much as in a united way with art. Because if you didn't have art, you wouldn't have anything. We wouldn't have this camera that's filming us. We wouldn't have the couch you're sitting on.
But for the longest time, I think if you asked anybody about Marilyn Manson, even people who weren't necessarily big fans of yours, but aware of your presence because you have a strong presence, then you'd ask, is Marilyn Manson the kind of person who's trying to build people up and build up a strong foundation upon which to better understand each other? Or is he trying to tear it down? You know what the answer would have been. Now, would they have been right back then, or has everyone got you wrong the whole time?
If they would have been right back then, we wouldn't be here now, probably. Essentially, because I was saying, I could just say the same thing now. If you went back and rewind and listened to Antichrist Superstar, it could translate in some ways. There's things that were said in 1984 that could translate to right now, because the world doesn't always change. It is a flat circle. And things come back to themselves, but mostly I had joy making this record, which sounds very unlike what you'd expect for me to say. And I don't know if joy is the correct word.
I always thought you had joy in making your music.
I enjoy taking the piss out of people too, I enjoy fucking shit. I enjoy being against the grain, and I'm not trying to be some sort of hero or someone who's trying to help others. I'm just trying to relate in the same way I did from the beginning to other people like me, or anyone who's not I'm not trying to be a pop artist that writes songs to uplift people for their own benefit, which is usually self-serving. Not naming any names or anything like that, but just to out history, like We Are the World and things like that. Whatever, if those things accomplish something, that's not even an example. But just, I'm trying to make songs that people that I think are like me could potentially benefit from just by listening to.
You talked about getting to a place where you can look to your future and you can build yourself, the person you want to be, and not be tied to who you were and what you've done in the past. When people come to that realization, normally what follows is that there's a need to do the work, right? And established ways people do that are like therapy, or they get clean, they go to rehab, they do whatever they need to do in order to try to clear a roadmap for them to make a future and not be stuck as a broken needle on the record. How did you get to that place where you could make this album? Because there's a lot, I'm sure, that's tucked away. Was this a follow-on from your last album and from the process of losing a parent and losing your father?
I think mortality obviously sets in when you lose both your parents, within a short period of time, which everyone has to go through. It sucks, and I'm for everyone who's going to experience that, which eventually everyone has to, unless some sort of science fiction process happens. It makes you question who your family is. It makes you make sometimes foolish decisions about trusting people because your heart's wide open. When making this record with Shooter, because we both lost our fathers, and we bonded over that, in a sense, and his father was a musical outlaw, as you said. My father was, also in his own right, a real asshole, but outlaw, I mean, he did not play by the rules, but he raised me to be who I am. And I'm not ashamed of that. It just sometimes you miss